Okay, I think we're rolling. Go ahead, Rusty.
Thank you, David. As mentioned, I am Russell Grice. I go by Rusty, and I'm an aquaculture business specialist, and I work with the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. And my focus, as you might guess, is on supporting folks with all things related to commercial oyster farming. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. So there's my contact information. I'll put it back up again. I'll mention that I'm based at the Auburn University Shellfish Lab, which is in Dauphin Island, Alabama. And most of the programming that I'll mention today is funded through either the Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant Consortium or National Sea Grant. So what we're talking about specifically with commercial oyster farming in this presentation is oysters that are cultured in containers and different types of gear systems. And they are in the water column and so the gear protects them from predation as well as holds them where they can have nutrients and food. And they also have farming techniques to where they can desiccate or air dry the baskets as well as the oyster for appearance and also to clean the gear. That middle picture is a tray of oysters from Pesh in New Orleans. These on this bottom right side are farmed oysters. You can see how they're more consistent in shape and size. The meat to shell ratio is nice compared to the oysters on the top left, which are from the wild harvest or natural reefs. They're just as delicious, but the focus today is going to be oysters sold for the premium half shell market. And this is, again, kind of what you're looking for through a farmed oyster, is a consistency that the chefs are looking for the eye appeal. And those, again, are sorted and graded over time to get that consistent. These oysters are grown from seed. That's a picture of my hand with little baby oysters, probably about 2 to 4 millimeter in size. And the picture on the right is just a picture in a silo that contains tens of thousands of baby oysters. That's how they are sold as single seed oysters, and then they are put in grow out systems. So the hatcheries and nurseries are the ones that both spawn and then rear the oysters. And this is a picture of the hatchery at the Auburn University Shellfish Lab. The brood stock is put in each of these little tubs, and then through a couple of different techniques, they induce the oysters to spawn, and then they are combined, the eggs and the sperm, to get the larvae, and then within a couple of weeks, the larvae are ready to be set. The lady in the very back is Susan Hill, and I mentioned her because she was visiting, and there'll be more on her visit a little bit later. Again, these are systems that are deployed in open water. The one on the left are floating cages. Those are floats with the cages you can see down in the water column. Typically, folks use 6 bag. So there's 6 individual bags within those cages. And then the picture on the right is at the Murder Point Oyster Company here in Alabama, where I live. This is the adjustable long line system. So you can see the pilings, and they have a strand that runs from piling to piling with PVC pipes stationed along the way. And between each of the pipes are hanging baskets. This system typically works better in water that is shallower, sort of 3 to 6 foot deep. And the lines, or each of those PVC pipes, have clips on it, so you can adjust the baskets up and down in the water column to mimic intertidal scenarios. So most of today is going to be driven from this product that we put together a couple of years ago. You can see the co-PIs, Dr. Swan, Sempier, and Stephen Dill, and myself. And this is, by the way, David's put links to these different resources in the chat. But this is oyster farming self-assessment. So it's a list of over, I think it's around 122 yes/no questions that cover a broad range of topics of things to consider as an potentially someone that's going to operate an oyster farm or someone that already is. And as mentioned, this index works well with other types of shellfish and other types of marine grown animals and species like seaweed. So the way this was put together is the team contacted experts from around the country in extension, farmers, researchers, and others to come up with a comprehensive list of as many things that could be thought of to put in the index. And then it was pilot tested with farmers here in Alabama and Mississippi and refined to come up with these basic headings. So business planning is my area. We'll briefly touch on each of these as we go along. But again, each of these sections has yes/no questions. It's not a pass/fail. It's just an opportunity to identify areas that may be of interest that a farm needs to take a look at or reach out to folks like myself or other resources to improve their resiliency. This is the opening section on business planning. Pretty basic stuff. Do you have a written business plan, etc.? And again, it's just yes/no questions on the right. So the name of the talk is Oyster Farming, Is It For You? And this is actually a screenshot from a movie I saw when my kids were little about 20 years ago from a movie called Lilo and Stitch, and it's based in Hawaii. And this little alien named Stitch crash lands into the Hawaiian island. And of course, the little girl Lilo brings it home. And as part of as you might guess, the little alien begins to destroy the house. And as it's throwing books off the shelf, I remember all those years ago, it grabbed a book and it said, Oyster Farming, Is It For You? And at that time, I just thought it was being ironic. But of course, aquaculture, and particularly in Hawaii, has been going on for centuries. So this is what I remember from business school when I was at Auburn back in the 80s. Businesses have a life cycle, just like animals and other species. There's a start and then there's an end. And I remind folks that I talk to, and typically I'm talking to folks that have not owned a business before and don't have a science or biology background. In any event, businesses have a life cycle, and it's important to understand that as you begin planning and building out your business plan and budgeting. They go through a growth cycle, and there will be a time when all industries mature. You can either innovate or make plans on what your exit strategy will be. But those are important things to consider from the beginning. With farming and oyster aquaculture, where we are, there's a pretty long time frame between when you decide to enter the industry and before you'll see cash flow. For instance, if you find a location and you obtain a lease, then it'll take you about a year to 15 months to get permitted. Another, say, 6 or so months to get acquire your gear and do installation, then buy your seed, and then you're looking at an additional 8 to 12 months before you have oysters that are marketable or reach market size. So you're already 2.5 to 3 years into your business cycle before you have cash flow. Industries all experience some type of shakeout, whether it be an economic downturn, a pandemic that closes restaurants, or any number of things. And it's important to have a budget as you go along to keep an eye on these things. Back in the olden times, we used to take the kids to the Blockbuster, and there was, I think, somewhere around 9,000 of these stores around the country and internationally. And for those that don't remember, you would go in and pick out movies in these little cartridges, and you would take those home for a rental fee for 2 to 3 days. After you need to return those, and if you didn't return them on time, you would be fined. And and you would go in, rent the movies, and then return them like on a Monday or Tuesday. And that was great. That's what we had. You played them in your own device at home. And then along came Netflix. So the thing that's important from a business perspective is Netflix started out by mailing through the postal service DVDs. So it was the same content. It was just a different type of logistics. Another way of, a fancy way of saying transportation. How do you get your product or service from where it's manufactured or grown in this case to the consumer? And Netflix found out that folks like to be able to have a subscription service, order movies, and then mail them back at their own leisure and not be fined. So you can see from Blockbuster from at its peak in the early 2000s to the beginning of around 2011 was out of business. This is the Kmart I worked at in Auburn when I was in obtaining my undergraduate degree, right across the street from the mall. That are those that are familiar with Auburn area. And I worked there. I remember one morning we were at a staff meeting before the store opened, and somebody mentioned that they were opening this thing called a Walmart out by the interstate. And we all had a good laugh. And because we were this was sort of 2,500 store chain around the country. And no one had really ever heard of Walmart. This is a picture of what's on that property today. They tore down my Walmart and they built a neighborhood market. This actual picture of the store. It's across the street from the mall. As I mentioned, ironically, what was directly across the street at one time was the Sears, which is no longer there as well. So what's the point? The point is when you operate a business, in many respects, it boils down to logistics or transportation. Very simple picture. Your product is harvested or farmed in our case, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico. It will, in almost all cases, be required to go through a processor, or you have to become a processor yourself. From there, it'll be sent to a distributor and shipped around the region or around the country. Obviously, it'll end up in a retail environment or a restaurant where the chefs prepare them, and then finally to the consumer. So, sort of 6 different businesses that handle your product along the way. So when you see how much you're able to obtain for your price for your oyster versus the menu price, you have to take into consideration all of those different businesses need to be sustainable as well. So when I talk to folks that have not operated a business, the ones that I've owned and operated I used what is called a LLC, or a limited liability company or corporation, which is really a standard business entity where you can incorporate, and it allows you to have your business as a separate entity that protects your assets, for the most part, your personal assets from different experiences such as lawsuits and that type of thing. It's limited, so it's important to note that if you put your home savings or personal property up for collateral for a loan for your business, then you are putting those assets at risk. So anyway, that is a very common business structure for simplicity, whether you're an owner or operator or just have a couple of partners. They're very easy to form. You can go to your county or state website. You can select a name, you register as an agent, you file the articles of organization and an operating agreement. It's important as you would guess with partners, you identify different things in the event that there's a change in interest of if somebody wants to exit the the partnership? How does that, what's the remedy for that, et cetera? Remember, this business is a living entity, and so it will survive even a partner or owner that passes away, and it goes into probate until that the entity is dissolved. You know, step 5 there is get an EIN. EIN is sometimes called a tax ID. It's an employee identification number. So sort of think of it as your social security number for your business. The reason that is important is because in order to open a checking account, you'll need an EIN, go to the bank, put some money with it, and you get the EIN from the Internal Revenue Service. This is a big milestone. This goes from someone that's sort of in a hobby, maybe they're growing a garden, vegetables, or collecting pecans and going to the farmer's market or doing crafts and that type of thing. Once you register your company with the Internal Revenue Service, you're responsible for reporting, even if you don't see revenue for 2 to 3 years. So let's talk about real quickly a basic business plan. You can simply write it down on a piece of paper or put it on a Word document. The name of your company. There's different sections. It can be as simple as this: company name, a tagline, like come up with what your tagline might be for your product. Mission statement would be something along the lines of farm cultured oysters for the premium half shell market, or some such thing. Name principal members as you have them, and then the legal structure in this case would be an LLC. Down at the bottom, you see regulation. This is oysters, shellfish that is for raw consumption, is the most heavily regulated food product, up there with milk. And you will have to understand these are regulations, not just best practices or suggestions. These are strictly enforced as to protect public health through food safety. So in my workshops, I'll have people break into groups, which is not very popular, but you got to learn to work with others. So, we'll have groups of 6 to 7 people, and I'll have them assign themselves different roles and responsibilities. And so if you're good with marketing, you're going to be the one that talks to the restaurateurs and the chefs. If you are good with social media and information technology, maybe you can work with the social media and do that type of work. I would should have given a disclaimer up front. We don't give advice. We just provide resources or put you in touch with folks. But in my experience, I have an accountant that I had for personal and for business use. So that is something that you can hire some expertise to do. The punchline at the end of this: if you're a small owner operator, just you and maybe some seasonal help, you're responsible for all of these roles. So one of the business planning tools that I like is called Fish Biz Plan. It's in the chat there. A lot of things to like about this. First, it's web-based, so you can access it from anywhere. You can also share it with others, like an accountant or a business partner, to go in and modify your plan. It's very robust and it's free. You simply register. Once you sign in, down the left-hand nav side, you can see a very detailed list of all the things that would be part of a business plan. Other things to like about it are there are tabs in each section, and within each of those tabs are a list of resources, and you can click on those links and it'll take you to different places. That's helpful for learning as well. It also has a very robust financial Excel document for your budget and business pro forma statements and things like that. Pretty straightforward. You simply go in, and it's a little bit intimidating at first, but it's pretty intuitive. You go in and list all of your assets. You can see along the bottom, assets, liabilities. If you have loans, then it'll populate out to financials, balance sheet for you, cash flows. This is something that, obviously as a business person, you want to be keeping up with this monthly or regularly. Again, you can share this with an accountant and with others, so that's pretty neat. This particular document you can download and work on separately as well. So you need to be familiar with the USDA and the programs that's out there for farmers. This is also a place to look at some business planning resources. They have a variety of programs, both for loans and for crop insurance and disaster relief. One thing that I will comment on is once you start a commercial farm, register with the USDA. You can go to look up their service center. I did it this morning, took a screenshot. I put in state of Alabama, the county of Mobile County, and it comes up with LaShanda James. I talk to her regularly. She answers the phone and emails, and they're really good people to work with, as are the other folks I've worked around. I worked around the Gulf of Mexico and the county offices. Register your farm. It doesn't matter if you are not going to have crops or harvest for a period of time. You need to register your farm. Another tool, this should be in the chat as well. Some of the folks I work with, particularly on the smaller operation side, have not ever used Excel and don't particularly ever plan to use it. So I came up with a way in the workshops and in training to use a browser or phone based, and the links in the chat. But basically you can click on that and then just do some budget modeling. Very simply answering a few questions. It's a limited in that it's typically, well, it only goes up to 2 acres as far as size, which is kind of minimum or maximum, if you will, for an individual. And you simply go in and click on how many oysters you would like to grow. It'll populate hours, suggested hours for labor per week based on the number. Acreage required to grow that number of oysters, and the series of questions. This is both a learning tool as well as a something to use for modeling. How much will seed cost? Seed suppliers are around the Gulf of Mexico. You need to know the supplier, what type of seed they sell, the cost, obviously, and the regulations between selling seed from one state to the other. Really important question number 3, what do you estimate the mortality rate to be for your oysters? Mortality rates vary significantly around the country and even from bay to bay in some states. That's a difficult one to answer, and you need to probably reach out to someone in the area that's farming, or someone that's familiar with the farming in the area to understand what that percentage will be. And then market price, same thing. This is a learning tool where not only are you going to sell your oysters, what is the market price? And you're really trying to have an estimate of what the market price will be in a few months from now, or maybe even a couple of years. Next, it'll ask about gear type. This was done as really as a favor by some folks in the IT department up at the extension system on campus. So with that, you're only able to put one gear type, which is a 6-bag floating cages, like I showed pictures of earlier, and that's fine. That'll give you a good idea, and that's one of the most popular gear systems used in the Gulf of Mexico. So how much do these 6-bag cages cost? You can find out, put the number in there, and it'll automatically populate how many cages you need to buy, as well as the cost of your lines and anchors. Do you have a boat suitable for oyster farming? Yes. If not, you can put a dollar amount in. Same with the vehicle. Employee and property management, if you're going to hire seasonal help, um, and you're not going to hire a part-time person or a full-time person, you can just leave that at 0 and it won't add any labor expenses. Also, if you're just going to do everything yourself, you just want to leave that at 0. When doing budgets, you can ask around, and I've done it myself. One thing that is hard to account for in a budget and you lose track of very quickly is your time. How much time and what is the value of your time? A very important consideration when you're looking at farming where you harvest once a year and have a profit or loss and or either realize profit and are able to pay yourself or not. Your acreage fees, it varies from state to state significantly. Harvest license, if you have any loans, and insurance. Insurance in this case would be more like liability insurance, not crop insurance necessarily. At any rate, you can then hit calculate. It'll come up with the cost of your infrastructure for startup. I didn't include boat or vehicles, which obviously could be significant as well. This is a 2-acre farm, and you can use the back and buttons and go back and modify it. This information is not retained because it's browser based. But with that, you can go to the next button and it'll give you based on the inputs. I put in 50 cents in this and I wanted to grow 156 acres. I put in the seed cost, et cetera, et cetera. There's a print functionality. So if you want to run different scenarios, you can do so and then keep those and then again go back and rerun it based on your different goals. One thing I like about that, this particular model is it will give you, based on your inputs, break-even cost or what you would realize in gross profit before taxes, et cetera. This is pretty optimistic outlook here with a relatively low mortality. Well, I won't say low. A mortality rate of 20% could be higher or lower. And again, this is what it looks like when you print it out, and I want to retain it for your records. Another one that we did a while back with the help of Dr. Vicky Puente, who is now with the FDA, myself, Glenn Chapman, Rob Hine at PMAR, and Chapman Ellis, who's out in Texas as well. This is a very, very robust tool. There's some information and acknowledgement from the funding and participants. This is a spreadsheet format. You can go in and estimate your gear costs based on their acreage, or you can determine based on what the number of oysters you want to grow. There's a list you can see of the different gear systems. This is not all of the gear systems out there, but if there's a gear system that you're interested in, then you can contact them and they can run you a similar cost estimate. Again, it's very detailed once you pick. So, for instance, appears adjustable long line system. You can reach out and contact supplier for all the different parts and then enter those parts that you negotiate or those prices you negotiate. It'll have the quantities and it'll populate your total cost. Again, this is something you can download and retain and modify and adjust as you go. All right, now to the next section of the index. It's section is marketing. Marketing, we were talking about before we started the call, is challenging for all organizations and companies. We frequently talk in extension at our meetings of how we're going to get our programming in front of the people that we support. That's challenging, and it is, as you would guess, it's challenging also for farm products. There's a link in the chat to a YouTube video. I was contacted a couple of years ago by America's Test Kitchen folks, and they put together a really good video. I think it's on YouTube about why you should eat oysters at home and how to shuck them. And Dan Souza is the chef that narrates it. And I like this because if you think about where you're going to sell your oysters and the opportunity for farmed oysters market share to increase, having folks understand how to enjoy them at home is potentially a significant market. There's some very good explanation about the different varieties of oysters. We have the Eastern oyster here in the Gulf, and he gives some details and tips about how to identify those and their different flavor profiles. As he starts talking about shucking, he talks about the different types of shucking knives and some safety considerations, and also some different ways you can use farmed oysters and prepare them through cooking, or even have them in the oven to warm them up a little bit so they're a little bit easier to shuck. There's Chef Lon Lamb on the right, and they talk about pairing shucked raw oysters with wines. And again, just a real entertaining video. It's I think what, 11 minutes long. It's got 340 something thousand views, and somewhere around the 4-minute mark, Dan gives a little shout out to the Shellfish Lab, which was nice. Next, we're going to talk about section 3, which is disaster preparedness planning. Long list of questions there, and the thing that we experience most frequently for the Gulf of Mexico in the way of a disaster or storms. So one thing, and I'll use a personal example here. Hurricane Sally came through a couple of years ago. It's been about 3 years ago. The thing you'll notice from this timeline, the storm entered the Gulf of Mexico on a Saturday morning. I of course remember watching it online and tracking the storm. Well, by Sunday evening, it had not developed into a hurricane, and then by the evening of Monday, when everybody's shutting down, it became a hurricane, and it also changed direction, and it turned 90 degrees north and started heading straight for Mobile Bay. This is where Dolphin Island is, by the way, right here. Fortunately for us, unfortunately for others, the storm, the most powerful part of the storm went just to the east of us. And the point is, from Tuesday morning, when the weather's already turned terrible, you're not going to have time to get out and necessarily do any storm prep. You're more focused on your own personal safety and those that might be working with you. So this particular storm, this might have been actually from Hurricane Zeta, I can't remember, but on the left you can see one of the mooring anchors that are used for the floating cage systems. This anchor got pulled. You can see when you have a string of these anchors, sort of 13 on the line. The cages themselves weigh 54 pounds dry. You put 1,000 or so market size oysters in there, and you've got a lot of weight and a lot of wave action and energy being exerted on your infrastructure. So yeah, there were some anchor pulls. The one on the left, this is about a 3.5, 4 foot anchor. The lesson learned there is when we went back and reinstalled some of our lines, we used these very large sort of 8-foot anchors. I think the cost is 40 up to, the large anchors were around $120. The point is, when you're doing your budget for your infrastructure, build it as storm ready and as robust as you can from the beginning, as best you can afford. Yeah, this is what it looked like when the cages ended up in the marsh. This is up in the marsh near Grand Bay, Alabama. Interestingly, the cages were able to recover, and the oysters were still alive. This is 3 or 4 days after the storm. But in order to get all the gear back out to the research area, we had to dispose of the oysters there. The picture on the right is another storm. This is over in Mississippi. In Mississippi, you're required to tag your gear so it can be identified, which is a good practice. Some folks were out kayaking after the storm, sent a picture with the number of the gear owner to me. I sent it over to the folks at Mississippi Division of Marine Resources. They contacted the farmer, and they collected their gear. And for a few years ago, the folks around the Gulf of Mexico, in my role, we all worked together, and there should be a link for it in the chat as well, on storm prep. These are downloadable PDFs that are available for different types of operations, whether it's your boat, your land-based operation, or your different gear systems. And those are some good ways to think about how you're going to prepare your storm based on your situation. Workforce development with all industries and businesses and universities and other organizations is a challenge to hire and retain the right types of folks. So there's some basic questions in the index there. And this is a picture from Big Tree Oyster Company out in Texas. That's Amy, one of the owners there on the right. And you can see these cages, in this case, are being held or lifted and attached to the side of the boat. And then the cages or the bags are removed. This is very significant amount of work and strength required. And you're typically or frequently working around sharp edges on boats, and sometimes in different conditions. So you want to have the right people working for you. This is just another screenshot off of Deer Island. You can see the three gentlemen there also working on a relatively small craft with a davit, and they're out there. In this case, they were just pulling their gear up to put their seed out. Ironically, one of the best methods that's been determined around, around the country and internationally, in order to flip the cages over, you can see that the pontoons are in the feeding position. In order to flip them over into an air drying position, it has been determined that it is practical to have someone swim out, grab the cage, and then walk them over. So there's an example. This is again from out in Texas. You can see these over here on the right. They've been flipped and they're drying probably overnight so that it doesn't cause too much stress on the oysters, because they are living animals. You can see the worker out there has climbed up on and is pushing down with his knees on one of the floats, reaching over the other float and flipping the cages. So, you know, if you're not comfortable with getting out of the boat, then you know, that's another indice for owning and operating an oyster farm. There are things in the water. This is from one of the farmers over in Northwest Florida. This is actually just after a heavy rainstorm. This is several hundred feet offshore. And again, you've got to be mindful of your surroundings. So section 5 is where a lot of the more science-based information comes along, and there are experts out there around the country to help you with these topics. But if you're going to have an oyster farm, being again that they're living animals, you need to understand what your environmental conditions are. Salinity is huge. Oysters don't survive in very low or extremely high salinity. Temperature change, etc. You can just go down the list. These are things that you should be either monitoring or at the very least familiar with. So with that, this is a map of Mobile Bay, Dolphin Island's down here where the shellfish lab is. Many of our farms are over here in what is Sandy Bay, and also over here off of Fort Morgan Road. The blue area is designated as conditionally approved waters, meaning that those waters are tested regularly by the Alabama Department of Health, and it conditionally allows commercial oyster farming for consumption. And there are triggers for closure. If there's an outfall, overflow from this wastewater treatment plant, heavy rainfall, and you need to understand what those triggers are in your area, and in your state. That brings us to section 6, which is regulatory knowledge. Again, this is a heavily regulated food product because it's consumed raw, and no one wants to see anyone have any illness. So it is regulated by the FDA and agents, the FDA and industry, through these interstate shellfish sanitation conferences. And those are held every couple of years or so, and changes or updates are recommended through committees. And sometimes these can take years to be incorporated, or sometimes they never are. And these are published in what is the National Shellfish Sanitation Program Guide. The 2023 guide that just came out is 500 pages. It is the overarching federal regulatory guide for shellfish. And with that, every state has an authority that can add additional regulations on top of this guide. Obviously, this is something you need to understand. And that's a picture. You can find that this on the ISSC website and download it. Section 7 is resources and access to knowledge. Are you familiar with an extension specialist in your state? You can look around the country and see that there are a variety of training programs for different species for commercial aquaculture, or you can reach out to extension specialists like myself. And one of the things that I remind folks of, and I mentioned it earlier, as extension specialists, we're not advocates. We don't give advice, and we also don't go to the authorities or agencies in the state on behalf of industry. That can be done by industry through joining associations, like the one that's hosting this call. I'm a member of all of these currently. Each one has their place, whether it's the East Coast, Pacific Coast, a national association, or the Gulf Coast. I'll mention Oyster South as well here. That's a nonprofit. It's an opportunity to join and to learn about commercial oyster farming in the region, Southeast region specifically. It's made up by farmers, researchers, scientists, students, processors, extension specialists, and others. That's worth taking a look at as well. Anyway, once you go through the 122 or so questions, you can fill out these by section and sort of give yourself a scoring. It's not pass fail, as I mentioned, but if you come up with a number of questions, for instance, if your regulatory knowledge is very, very low, then reach out to the resources available to you and get up to speed on those. Again, it's a self-rating, not particularly important. I will say, though, that if you take the index and identify an area, it's good to go back 6 months or a year later and retake it and see how your knowledge has changed. At the very end, specific to the area which it was produced for, Mississippi and Alabama, there's a list of supporting materials and the links associated there too. Real quick, we mentioned these farmed oysters are grown from seed. So seed is provided or available to be bought through commercial hatcheries and nurseries. One thing that is should be a constant throughout the conversation is record keeping. When you buy your oyster seed, how many did you order? How many did you get? And what's a good way to get an estimate of your delivery? For instance, if somebody orders oyster seed for research from Auburn University's Shellfish Lab, one way to determine how many seed is in the order is by weighing subsamples. It's very simple math. This is what I saw a picture where somebody took a seed delivery. It looks like a lot of seed. I don't know what size they are, but it's a huge investment. Probably the biggest check you'll write throughout the year once you've paid for all your gear and infrastructure. So you simply need a scale that hopefully goes out a few decimal points. I use beans and peas or dry goods in the workshop because they travel better, and you don't have to worry about them dying on you. And I use different kind of containers to make it a challenge. So anyway, I give out the dry goods to the different groups and have them just based on looking at them an estimate. These are all 1 pound bags of dry goods. Anyway, you weigh these out. These all should be around 448 grams or 1 pound. You put a container of some type. You zero that out so you're not weighing it out. Then you put a subsample of what you're trying to estimate, weigh that, and then you do 3 to 5 samples or as many as you like. The more samples you do, the better the estimate. You count those to give you a number per number of item per that weight or per that sample weight. Also in oyster farming, you'll hear of this thing called doubles. These are, I think these are navy beans. This one I don't want to eat. I don't know what happened, but if, in oyster farming, you can end up what's called doubles, and that's where the seed, the larvae is set, 2 larvae have set on one piece of microculture, and it ends up being 2 oysters attached together, and those are not marketable for the half shell market. So if you end up with a lot of doubles in your seed order, that's probably something you want to talk to about your provider about. At any rate, you'll want to use some very simple math. Take your samples, the average total, and take the total delivery weight and divide that by the sample to get an estimate. And by the way, in the workshop, no one's close, within 20% or so of guessing how many beans are in the containers or peas. Either high or low, it's always quite a ways off. Also, you'll see a YouTube video of how this can be done, which is very helpful. Every year I publish through Extension a shellfish seed supplier for the Gulf of Mexico and list those that I'm aware of. If you are new or you're not listed, please contact me and we'll put you on the 2024 list. This is not recommended by extension of who to buy from, and the supplier and the buyer have to understand the regulations of transporting seed between state lines. A great resource just for online learning we put together through the University of Florida, IFAS, and this is available. It's a very comprehensive online self-paced course, and it covers everything that we could think of, and they're videos. So there's no tests involved. You can just go through it and learn at your own pace. Those are the sponsors I mentioned, and it's definitely worth a look. Also, the National Sea Grant Office recently put out a dashboard for those of you that are curious about marine aquaculture around the country. You can click on the dashboard and look at the policies that are present by state, and that's very interesting. Sometimes folks think that there are advantages, and perhaps there are, from one state to another, but the team there at the National Law Center worked with the resource managers around the Marines, the Gulf states, and the states in that had marine aquaculture, and put this nice dashboard together. And there's a look of it. You can search by a drop-down list of different things. Just a real quick, another extension program that Dr. India Tarnecki, who runs the Shellfish Lab, and I are working on when it comes to workforce development. We are winding down year 2 and about to start another round of the commercial oyster aquaculture sector training program. It's an apprenticeship program where we have funds that are matched by companies in Mississippi and Alabama, specifically for training in any part of commercial oyster aquaculture. These are some pictures from folks that participated in the last couple of years from Navy Cove here in Alabama and Magnolia Key over in Mississippi. And if you just have any questions about that program and how it works, give us a shout. Also, there's an ongoing oyster community of practice that myself and Jillian Sauer, who's the PhD student, this is a program not just for commercial oyster farming, but for anyone that is interested in the oyster as a resource, whether it be resource managers, restoration specialists, researchers, etc. So over the last couple of years, we held in-person workshops where folks got together and listed a variety of suggestions and issues around managing the resource and ideas about how to go about that. So if you have questions about that or like to participate, give Jillian or I a shout. A while back, we also had what we called the CORE program, which is concerned oystermen and women restoring estuaries. You might remember restaurant closures during the pandemic. What happens in oyster aquaculture systems is oysters get too large to become marketable. No one wants an oyster for half shell the size of your hand, for instance. So it also puts a lot of wear and tear on the gear system. So this program was able to purchase with match from the participating farms over 575,000 oysters that were placed on different reef areas as identified by the resource management organizations in each state of Mississippi and Alabama for reef restoration. Peer-to-peer was a program that we did a few years ago with support from Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant in Oyster South. I was administrator on it. I'll just mention that if you go to the Oyster South website and you become a member there, I don't think you have to become a member, but they have continued to raise funds for this peer-to-peer fellowship program. It's a travel assistance program for those that are in, some part of the commercial oyster farming industry to go visit other organizations or companies and learn about how they do things. I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, Susan Hill, that was down at our facility. I think it was in 2018 as part of the first peer-to-peer program. And she obtained travel assistance to come spend some time and learn about spawning and how husbandry around oysters. And I had the opportunity this fall to go up and visit her now commercial nursery operation that she has in North Carolina. So great story there and a great program if you have an interest. Finally, I'll mention this summer, this publication came out. If you're just interested in aquaculture at a national level, this can be found online at the Wiley Online Library. And that's a great resource to go back or to go and learn about what's going on in aquaculture around the country and not just for shellfish. In Alabama, we have the AL Aquaculture website I maintain. You can go on there. It'll walk you through permitting and has a bunch of other information on there about how to go about that. I mentioned that, and there are resources in every state. There are specialists in every state, and they're very happy to help you. And like myself, their goal is to give you the best opportunity for success. This particular site has the a sighting tool that I had a screenshot of earlier on how to go about locating a commercial farm, and that's the map. And again, the areas that are not conditionally approved, you cannot conduct commercial oyster farming. So that's it. I mean, oyster farming is it for you. You can go through, talk to myself and others, and I like to include this is what's going on in Alaska this time of year. I'm sorry, not Alaska, Canada. This is Prince Edward Island at Raspberry Point Oyster Company. They've been doing this type of farming up there for decades, and they cut a hole in the ice and go harvest. Just a picture the USDA folks took when they visited. This oyster is about the size of a dime, and I always include this because this is a little baby juvenile stone crab and another, I think, a pea crab and fish. These systems are great for nursery habitat, and the farmers that I work with are very conscious of that. So I'll say thank you to David and others for letting me participate. I have a minute or so for questions, and I'll leave up my contact information. Don't hesitate to call me.